I think WazirX has something like 8 million accounts, and India supposedly has 100 million crypto holders. I mean, those are big numbers. It affects a lot of people.
I couldn't find enough government guidance after the incident telling people what to do, what not to do.
But I think it's really thrown up a massive debate about what's going on with some of these crypto platforms.
There's a lot of confusion as to the ownership pattern structure of WazirX. I think it's held by some companies in BVI, Cayman Islands.
The best outcome here is that everybody gets their 55% back right away. Hi, welcome to episode 23 of the India Dialogue. My name is Ruchir. I'm joined by Manu and Mitali. Mitali is the acting director at the Reuters Institute. She's an author and known for her time at CNBC. Manu is a lawyer and advocate with his own practice, as well as the spokesperson for DMK. I'm Ruchir. I'm the CEO at Distributed Energy and chair at School of Policy and Governance. Every week, we go through issues that matter in India. We try to dive deep. We try to discuss issues in a way where we may disagree with each other, but try and unpack it meaningfully. This week, we want to go deep on one issue, which is the hack of a cryptocurrency exchange in India called WazirX. Mitali, why don't you tell us about what happened at WazirX?
Yeah, thanks, Ruchir. And I think this conversation will take many sort of rich turns to it because we've got an entrepreneur, we've got a legal voice with Manu, and I can add some perspective on what
And
I've
we've
observed.
got the author of Crypto Crimes
As
Inside
an-
India's Best Kept Secret. Go ahead.
as an
Mitali.
author and journalist. So, first, a very sort of brief overview of what the event is, and then I think we'll start unpacking it. So, on July 18th, earlier this month, this is an India based crypto exchange, WazirX. They came out and said that they had faced this really large hack, and the attacker had stolen about 45% of the crypto that the platform held. This forced them to, of course, halt operations. There was after that a series of different types of communication, both in terms of who they held responsible for it, why they think it had happened, and what kind of currencies, as you know, crypto coins can be held in different forms, had been attacked. So, first they said your fiat currency deposits remain safe. Then they came back and said, we're not sure what's happening. They started suggesting the involvement of North Korean groups such as the Lazarus group being, responsible for this. And at the end of it, I think now, after what has in any case been a really large blow for the platform and for its users, they've come out with a fairly interesting proposition, which the founder came out with on Twitter or X, where he said that we're looking to socialize losses that we incurred from a hack. Now, just to put the figures into context, according to them, they saw about $230 million taken out or pulled out from the exchange. So Nishchal Shetty, who is the co-founder of WazirX, came out and said that there's a couple of things that we expect to see happening. There could be legal proceedings, and how legal fees sort of really adds up and it takes time. So our approach is to socialize and rebuild. And this is his tweet saying that we socialize the loss and then we rebuild by growing the business, where you can distribute any profits and find more solutions like new buyers. So part of this interesting socialization of losses has two components to it. One, that he put out a poll saying that customers, for 55% of their funds, they could vote on two options. Either they could access 55% of their funds without the ability to withdraw those funds, but get priority for recovery funds, or they could access 55% of their funds with the ability to withdraw, but then they would have second priority for potential funds. However, the trick here is that the remaining 45% would be converted and locked in by the company itself. Now, obviously, that has really raised a furor, and he went on to say this is not legally binding; it's a suggestion. But I think it's really thrown up a massive debate that has been raging for a long time about what's going on with some of these crypto platforms and what this solution is. So maybe Maybe I'll pause there. Ruchir, why don't you
There's a
explain? Yeah,
there's
sorry, go
something
ahead, Manu.
I want to touch upon here,
Yeah.
Mitali. Thank you for that, fantastic background, right? The recent issue is this cyber attack, which they claim, which seems to have taken out 45% of the value that was held in WazirX. I've looked at the terms and conditions that any average user signs with WazirX when they do it. Now, most people may or may not read this closely, but I think it's very important to understand two legal aspects. First is applicable law. The applicable law, you might be mistaken to think was laws of India, but it's not. It's laws of the British Virgin Islands. And I think the ownership of WazirX, which I'll come to next, has raised multiple questions. I think 2-3 years ago, when there was an investigation in and around WazirX and its owners, the directors, etc., there's a lot of confusion as to the ownership pattern structure of WazirX. I think it's held by some companies in BVI, Cayman Islands, maybe the Singapore-based Binance, but operating out of Cayman. Ruchir, you might know better. The second legal aspect, which I found was interesting and perhaps to some shocking, is most agreements we have a force majeure clause saying, if there is like an act of God or something, something like an epidemic, a pandemic, an earthquake, etc., then we are not responsible, right? The force majeure clause here in the user agreement has the word security breaches or cyber attacks. So WazirX cannot be held liable or responsible in a court of law in the British Virgin Islands. And I'm definitely no expert in British Virgin Islands laws, but you cannot hold them liable for security breaches or cyber attacks. So that's the context from which you'll have to go ahead. So Ruchir, you wanted to share some thoughts on a similar experience you had earlier. Do you want to sort of bring that in now?
It's not a story I'm proud of, but I want to say it was 2016 or 2017. There was an exchange back early days of crypto. So I've been in the crypto land since 2013, and early days of crypto, to be able to get your money into an exchange, you had to jump through all of these hoops because the traditional banking system does not allow you to enter crypto. So I had to first transfer my money to a cash house in Czech Republic and then do a bank transfer from there and so on and so forth. Eventually landing in an exchange at the time called BTCE. That exchange doesn't exist anymore because what happened is in 2016-17, the FBI alleged that BTCE was involved in money laundering, and they confiscated all of the US dollars. And when they confiscated all the US dollars, the exchange went down for a few days with some of my crypto holdings in there, and came back online 3 to 5 days later and said, look, we lost 40% of dollars. We will socialize the losses here. You can access 60% of your funds. And by the way, over the next 2 years, we will repay you the balance 40% from the fees we have. Thankfully, at the time, I logged in, put in a hardware wallet. For anybody who doesn't understand crypto, hardware wallet is where you can store your private keys so that other people cannot access it. I put in a hardware wallet, transferred the 60%, and then hope that my 40% will come back over time. And the 40% never came back because they went offline a month later. Nobody knows what happened to them. The rumors were that certain oligarchs from some countries took over. But that was how that situation played out. And why I say that and share that here is because I personally think one of the challenges here is, despite the force majeure that Manu laid out, the definition of solvency is being able to repay the debts that you owe. And in this current moment in time, in my mind at least, the exchange owes money to the folks who had accounts on there. So from that perspective, I'm speculating that WazirX is now insolvent, and as a result should be in some form of an insolvency court.
Not that WazirX is the devil, but if I was to play their advocate, um, they their ownership is a real issue, Ruchir. They apparently everybody works from home. They have one two-seater space in one of the co-working spaces in Mumbai. That's all they have as a registered office in Mumbai. Um, the ED investigation going back to August 2022 looked at their ownership pattern, and the ED found, and this is in the ED's press release dated 5th August 2022, it says that Zanmai Labs Private Limited, the company owning WazirX crypto exchange, has created a web of agreements with Crowdfire Inc. USA, Binance, brackets Cayman Islands, Zetai Private Limited Singapore, to obscure the ownership of the crypto exchange, right? So you can move a petition, an insolvency petition in India, but you will have to somewhere establish that they have some presence here, and I think that's a real concern. Um, but Mitali, I mean, do you have any views on the internationalized nature of this sort of entire operation, the crime? There's allegations that this cyber attack may have originated by North Korean hackers or at the behest of North Korean hackers. Ruchir just shared his experience, which spoke about perhaps other countries being involved, people from some other parts of the world. So jurisdiction on one side, but the entire sort of risks are so magnified by the nature of this transaction.
Yeah, and there's so many parts to it, Manu. I mean, if you were to address just the attack in itself, I would say it's not an uncommon feature. I think one of the biggest problems that corporations across the world, and India is more vulnerable than others, face is cyber attacks. They've only been increasing over the years. Some, people listening may remember the attack that happened on AIMS. It also happened on Safdarjung. So very, very critical organizations and spaces have faced these sort of attacks where data has been held ransom in exchange for, I would say, 98% of the time. This is what I got from a lot of legal voices and from those who look at insurance. 98% of the time, the demand is in crypto coins because of its because of the invisible nature that it has, because of the fluid nature that it has, because of the very reasons that Richard pointed to, where there is so much ease of movement. Crypto becomes the weapon of choice. That's one part of it. The other part of it, Manu, and this is such a big sort of thing to unpack, is what came through even when I was researching my book and speaking to person after person was that this is in any case a complex mess. In India it is doubly so because of this situation with policy. First of all, you have these three protagonists, right? You have the RBI on the one hand, you have SEBI on the other, and then you have the finance ministry itself. Now between the three of them, they have not decided what crypto is, how crypto should be regulated, and whether this is something to support or something to oppose. The RBI has a very strong view against it. The finance ministry has uh, it's let's just say it's sort of seasonal, so it keeps changing depending on what the mood and view might be. And SEBI honestly doesn't seem to have any grasp on the situation, but should do. So it's become a little bit of a turf war, saying who's going to police this this child that's running riot in the classroom. That's the biggest problem with policy, Manu. Shall I maybe pause there?
The other interesting part I noticed, which again brings another fourth, perhaps unintended protagonist into the picture, is the enforcement directorate. Right, from two points of view. One is uh, as the ED, and we've discussed about the ED quite a bit from the context of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And as you can imagine, a lot of the money laundering now, not a lot, maybe some part of the money laundering is now happening using cryptocurrency. They are now trying to get a grasp around this, so much so that the ED has even set up their own crypto wallet to store seized crypto assets and so on. But what I learned about WazirX is they do, though there is no formal regulation by SEBI or RBI or the finance ministry, they have registered themselves with the Financial Intelligence Unit, and they have some sort of open line of communication and heightened transparency with the ED. So they do share a lot of the information they get usually, which is the KYC information, and also ensure that the ED has access to understanding. But all of this, I mean, perhaps only in the last 2 years, as I said, going back to August 2022, there was an investigation into WazirX, and part of WazirX assets were seized by the ED itself, right? And this will happen. I mean, even if you're a bank, if there is a money laundering um, offense and they go and store the money in a bank, then that account will get seized and frozen and so on. But again, this regulation picture is very interesting. Richard, do you want to come in also from
I
the
just
entrepreneurial side?
just quickly on that, Manu, two things from what you're saying, and it's absolutely right. One is, what was the solution to this money laundering allegation? Because this is not new, huh? Ever since these exchanges were formed, there were concerns about money laundering. So the solution was, okay, we put very stringent KYC norms. If you put very stringent KYC norms in, then what happened? Where did this sort of fall through the cracks? The second part of the problem is, a lot of people who were watching this from a policy point of view pointed out that increasingly the only conversations that were happening with this small clique of the platforms. You can't be speaking to platforms about how to police platforms. It doesn't work. It's like, my interests are in a particular business, and I come and say, "Will you only talk to me? I'll tell you how this is done." And that was a huge problem for people watching what was happening with policy, because there was streams of these platform owners going into the finance ministry to have closed door discussions about how to regulate the industry. I mean, great, let's not regulate it, right? That's where it landed. And the other one, on the point you're making about the ED, is absolutely right, Manu. And a very seasoned police officer told me that, it's ironic, but it's the nature of how it is, which is that crime or criminal activity always moves at a much faster pace than checking it or policing it. So you will always find that police or investigative authorities are always running a little bit behind the curve. So I think it's great that the enforcement directorate is sort of getting its hands into it, as it should, because cybercrime is a reality now. Frankly, it's quite late. But do they have a full grasp on the situation, either in terms of skilling or awareness? I'm not certain.
Just to summarize that from my perspective, Mitali, and I've seen this happen across industry, is this sort of concept or notion of self-regulation, right? Self-regulatory bodies. So, and that's often, I mean, the problem is created by the government itself, where government regulation is slow to crystallize. Then industry will sort of step in and say, look, can we offer to regulate ourselves? We'll form associations, we'll come up with global best practices and so on. So we see that in across industries. But this again, another entrepreneurship story, another startup story, one of the the big ones in this industry. So Ruchir, your thoughts on this probably?
Yeah, I mean, crypto is hard. I think, I mean, in some ways, what happened in this situation is a feature of crypto, not a bug, in that, it is immutable and you cannot just undo a transaction. It's not like a centralized exchange where um, you can basically fix it by saying, oh, this got stolen, we will redo the ledger, because there is no one person controlling the ledger. And that's a really difficult situation, because the crypto universe needs to reflect on how does it deal with some of these situations. They did in Ethereum's case. There was a big theft, and Ethereum actually undid that theft by agreeing on the whole protocol. You need 51% of Ethereum holders to agree, and they did agree that you cannot have this theft stand. But Bitcoin, it's much harder to do. So I don't know what coins were stolen here, but it would depend on the coins themselves in terms of whether the transaction can be undone. From a WazirX perspective, I think this is a really difficult situation. The BVI Cayman structure in the crypto universe is extremely normal. I've looked at multiple investments that that come from BVI and Cayman. One of the things that did surprise me was the size of the theft, because the tax. So first there was the ED situation, and the ED situation is important because if I, as an NRI, want to transfer money from my bank account, I have to do 15CA, 15CB, submit a bunch of documents to to ask the bank to remit money abroad. So the crypto exchange bypassing that is tricky, and I believe at the time the amount of money that had moved overseas was 2,500 crores before the ED stepped in. So that is a large amount of money that went out unmonitored. Um, the second piece that is important in this story is also the taxation that came about. So Mitali was saying it's seasonal in terms of how the finance department. Well, the finance department lost the taxes from it, but so all profits in crypto, independent of how long you hold them, are taxed at 31 point something percent. And every time you transfer money in and out of the exchange, there's TDS on it. So why that matters is once that got introduced, a lot of the Indian crypto businesses moved their base outside India. So a lot of them went to Dubai, a lot of them went to Singapore, and so on. And the reason why that's important is that decreased the volume of transactions on Indian exchanges. So the thing that surprised me here was the scale of the theft. For one reason, I recently learned through an investment I was considering that WazirX was doing about $600,000 of volume a day. So for an exchange doing $600,000 of volume, resulting in $230 million of theft is a large disparity. So I believe a big chunk of it is long-term holders of crypto who invested in for a while. I think WazirX has something like 8 million accounts, and India, supposedly has 100 million crypto holders. So that are, I mean, those are big numbers. It affects a lot of people, and a lot of people's savings. Given the promise of crypto, a lot of people's savings are going to be burnt in this exercise, given so many people have been holding it long term. It's devastating. I hope the owners are really reflecting on where they are, because as a crypto holder, this would be devastating. I don't. Yeah, there's
So
no other way.
what I understand is that they have, of course, we will come to the socializing of losses in a bit, but they have informed the authorities. And again, this is something maybe I want Mitali to help me understand, which is that they claim to Mitali have informed the Finance Intelligence Unit and another government organization under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology called CERTIN, which I believe stands for Computer Emergency Response Team. And they are, from what little I understand, are the sort of the crack team to deal with cyber crisis, cyber attacks, and so on and so forth. Now, again, I know very little about how this will pan out, but I presume they have the necessary wherewithal and competence to go in and look at all of that. But again, given the international nature and how these cyber attacks happen, have you seen, while you were in your book, or while you were researching for your book or otherwise, have you seen any uh, instance where CERT has sort of played a role in figuring out cyber attacks or investigating them? Of course, the part of how you bring this now to the logical conclusion in an Indian court is aside. Can the investigation give any closure to people who have invested?
Actually, to be honest with you, Manu, I think the whole problem is that not just the attack. Of course, the attack is done under the guise of not being able to see who the perpetrator is. But even what happens after that is a black box, and that is a big problem with a lot of these companies. And it's not just large, sort of government-run, government-owned organizations we're talking about. It's even with private sector companies like Big Basket, like Paytm. Scores of them have faced cyber attacks in the past. Scores of them have apparently, and this is apparently because we have no confirmation, had huge amounts of data compromised. I mean, imagine something like a Paytm, for example. How much critical information would be there about, every individual that could be held ransom? AIMS has, politician after politician, person of influence after person of influence going in there for medical support and advice. How much critical information is there? But we never hear anything, Manu. We don't hear how this is resolved. We sometimes don't even hear confirmation that the attack is in order to sort of, demand crypto in as ransom. It's sort of surmised. We don't know whether that amount is paid. Oil India had massive hits that happened, in the middle part of last year, I think. Again, did they pay it? Didn't they pay it? What happened to their rigs that were compromised? We just don't know. And I think this is a huge part of the problem. And I was just going back to, I had a long conversation with Nishchal Shetty. And at that point, and he always has been actually, the poster boy of crypto in India. He's very suave, he's very confident, very outspoken, often the one who sort of takes to Twitter to take on an issue on behalf of the crypto industry. And it's not the first brush for WazirX. They've had multiple brushes along these lines of, whether it is with the Enforcement Directorate, whether it is with FEMA, whether it is when they had that very public spat about whether Binance actually owns stake in them or not. So this has all played out in a very public fashion. And sometimes, and I don't want to make false equivalences, but I'm really reminded of the blow up that happened with FTX in the US, Manu, where towards the end, when the legal team that was looking to sort of penalize FTX and its founder Sam Bankman-Fried just pointed to the fact that, like, it's just incredible at some level that there are these entrepreneurs who run these really massive businesses where we don't know what checks and balances there are. We don't know if there's an advisory board on this company. We don't know if there's a steering board on this company. We don't know what the mechanism is to ensure that there is accountability. And now we also don't know, as Richard is pointing out, what happens to the money. If they say 45% we're going to hold on to, what are the ramifications? Because Nishchal Shetty is sitting in Dubai. As you said, the company itself is headquartered somewhere else. So what are you going to do about it? And this is really sad, because you also speak to a lot of people who are so passionate about crypto, and Ruchir is clearly one of them. But it just never passes the smell test in terms of legitimacy, and that's a huge problem for this industry.
Not to go back to the regulatory framework piece, but before we go into the losses, Mitali, one other question I had is I couldn't find enough government guidance after the incident telling people what to do, what not to do. Assuming assuming Ruchir's number of 6 million accounts, user accounts, is true or close to truth. It's a lot of people, right? It's think of these on a very non-crypto world, in a non-crypto world. Think of these small chit fund scams and all of those which involve much lesser, even like a few thousand people. And you see the government coming down very hard for much lesser losses. So I don't know, to be honest, whether it should be the RBI, SEBI, or the union government or somebody else. But I couldn't find any directions. What I understood was WazirX suspended activity for a while, and new deposits and investments were put on hold. I don't know if that is undone now, but what can a government do in this scenario, according to you?
I think the thing about, like, this is a situation everywhere in the world. Like, for example, the famous story in the US is, for the longest time, the SEC would not allow Bitcoin ETFs. And the investment companies sued their way to get the SEC to allow Bitcoin ETFs to be traded on the stock exchange. The regulators, because of the losses and the incidents here to the end retail investor, they've been protective around not allowing much activity in this space in most parts of the world. And the challenge here is that actually regulating the space and getting involved is a much better thing to do, because you provide clarity and direction to the the participants than to stay quiet and be on the sidelines. So I think the big issue is that even now, in this situation, SEBI hasn't made public statements, and they should be providing guidance to WazirX on how to think about it, instead of WazirX defining its own rules on how the losses should be handled. One more comment is, Manu and Mitali, there's one more player in this whole game which we haven't mentioned at all, which is liminal. So the wallet, um, WazirX effectively was using a third party custody service. A custodian is somebody who holds money on your behalf. And in this case, the custodian was handling the crypto on WazirX's behalf. And they had to provide one signature, and WazirX had to provide 4 or 5 signatures for the money to be moved. And the first statement came out from WazirX saying, oh, it was a liminal problem. And then liminal came out and said, well, how did the hackers get the other 3 signatures that needed to be used to move the funds? So even the underlying issue, there's no consensus at the moment in terms of how the money got transferred.
And no, just to add to that, Manu, I would watch as well to see what guidance there is, because, in the case of and we've seen that very small banks, sometimes they have been blow ups. In that case, the RBI moves very swiftly. Particularly those who have deposits are immediately protected. Then there's some kind of protection that's provided to others that may have current accounts, etc., with the bank. The system is it moves. It's not ideal, the fact that the bank has gotten to that point, but it moves. I would really be keen to see what advice any of these parties, whether it is the Reserve Bank or SEBI or the Finance Ministry, can provide on that. And just to buttress Richard's point, he's so on point, because one of the countries that comes to mind in this whole situation is Japan, which also doesn't consider cryptocurrency as a legal tender, but because of their own experiences in the past of these blow-ups, they have worked so thoroughly to kind of to structure something around this, both in terms of verification records, transaction records. I think they have a financial services agency, then they have a virtual currency exchange association, then they have a security token offering association. So when that FTX blow up happened, the only one component of that company that returned money to its clients was in Japan. Regulation in this case does have benefits, particularly when you're dealing with an asset. And I know this gets so much pushback from crypto supporters, because they feel it's to unshackle from the world of regulation and the world of banks that this should be constructed. But I think this is really deeply disappointing. And just one final point, Manu, which is that part of the reason why crypto begun to get taxed was because of how fast it was growing in popularity. So you were looking at a lot of younger people, some of whom don't have the wherewithal to get into the stock market to invest, who were investing in crypto. You were looking at a lot of people from B and C cities, not just metros. You were beginning to see a jump in women crypto traders as well. So we're talking about a very, sort of a low bracket in terms of the investment. We're not talking about some billionaires who, also trade in crypto for fun and games. This is affecting a very you and I sort of situation.
So I think that's where perhaps maybe it's the right time to understand this socializing the loss concept, because again it's something I hadn't heard of, and of course, Ruchir, your previous experience in 2016-17, you've seen it before, but talk us through this whole idea of socializing the loss, right? Again, such a novel but so smart, right? I mean, I can't imagine as a lawyer or in being an entrepreneur in any other field, right? Just saying that we've had a bad year, but now can we all share this in some way? Uh, how do you do
I
it?
vacationed too much this year. Let me socialize the losses.
So I suppose it's only possible where you hold funds of a customer or a user, because if you've already received money from a customer, you can't really socialize it as much as when you're holding someone's money. Basically, what they're saying is there are 2 options. I think it's still a poll. They haven't come out with the last answer. But the poll is, hey, we can give you 55% now and we will deprioritize you if we recover the balance, or we can give you 55. We will keep the 55% frozen, but we will prioritize you if we recover the balance. And what they're really trying to do is keep their pool liquid in terms of the money available to them, so that users can start using the system again. I imagine that as an exchange, their fees are fairly lucrative, and if they wanted to make good people over 3 or 4 years, they probably could. But ultimately, um, there should be no such situation as a business where you are not able to pay your debts when they're due and continue operating. Because effectively, now there are opportunities for fraud where you bring in more money to pay back other people or cover your losses. So that's the really tricky piece here, which, like, I have a very clear view. I don't think for me there is any doubt that there is an insolvency situation here, and I think the best outcome here is that everybody gets their 55% back right away, like with no limits, and if the balance is recovered, that balance be provided to people, and then you are allowed to start operating again in a different format, restructured, and so on. I think any other outcome here will be unfair to the people who lost money already, because they should have the choice right now what to do with the balance.
Richard, can I ask though? I mean, as an entrepreneur, and this is not a publicly listed company, it's a privately held company. Perhaps they've had sort of investors in the past. I mean, can you even do it? Like, it really belies logic. The fact that this is someone else's assets that are parked, they just parked there. You're a repository. You don't own them. Can you just say, well, I'm going to hold on to 45% because I got problems to to deal with?
Mitali, this is becoming a little bit of a confessional session, because now I'm going to talk about how I lost money in FTX. It's not something I'm proud of, and maybe I should not be a crypto advocate at this point because I've lost money multiple times.
No,
But
no, the true test of an advocate is like to still champion the cause after such terrible losses. So go ahead.
losses. Oh man, on the like, so the reason what I was going to tell you was, like, FTX is how this is how it played out in FTX, in that because they were, I believe, a Bahamas company. Because I get insolvency letters from Bahamas right now. They were not being monitored as closely as an exchange should. And as a result, they were effectively commingling funds where they would use, say, my money or other depositors' money and deploy it for other investments. So, for example, they invested in a company called Anthropic, which at the time was worth something, and now it's worth a lot. So they gave a lot of money of their own to a sister company, um, which then used that money for trades. So a lot of the problem with a lot of these jurisdictions is the companies go unmonitored in terms of what they do with user funds. And that was again the point I was making earlier. Regulation does this space good, not bad, in that if they were treated like any other exchange in most of the jurisdictions, then you would hope that the funds are put on the side in a separate account, which I think, by the way, like, let's be clear, in WazirX's case, it seems like they were isolated. So that's not the problem here. But again, like, the monitoring question is a problem because of the jurisdiction. What Manu pointed out, that this is a BVI company, because I was confused too. Why are they not in insolvency again? And Manu rightly pointed out, well, we need to follow BVI rules, not NCLT or India rules, and that's where, I mean, and as a result, they will also use this to their advantage a little bit, right? Like, where they'll try to play between the jurisdictions and figure out how they can stay afloat. I mean, as an entrepreneur, if I own a company, my number one job is to maximize shareholder value. So here for WazirX, like, from their perspective, their number one goal here is to survive. So I understand why they are proposing what they are, but I think, yeah, it's very tricky.
I'm sure there'll be interesting aspects coming, in the coming days. But I personally found this conversation very useful. Ruchir, I've never invested in crypto assets before, but I think after hearing all of this from you, I don't see that changing anytime soon. But then I'm not one of the 100 million
I,
Indians
I I
who.
want to, like, people, just so that this does not look like I bash crypto. If you're new to crypto, please buy them through ETFs in the US, because that's like likely the most safe way to do it. The second thing I would say is, if you are an investor in crypto, don't leave your money on an exchange. Please use a hardware wallet. Put it with you. Keep it safe, because this is just part of the space, and sadly, you will encounter some of these beaches. So that's sort of my
Yeah. And the
propensity.
third thing I would say, Manu, is that if you can't explain to your mom and dad what crypto is, then don't invest in it. Honestly, it's not as simple as buying a biscuit of gold. They're not on the same level as assets. It is a complex space. If you don't get it, don't get into it.
Fourth thing is, if you can't do any of this, buy Mitali's book. Understand,
Low
at
key
least
pitch.
know what you're in for. But yeah, fantastic. Thank you guys. Really, as Mitali said, a rich sort of conversation from my perspective, anyway. So, can I take that as a cue to move to Have You Heards, which is the one last part where we talk about something quirky, interesting, funny that
I'm
we
happy to
found
drive that.
this
I'm
week.
happy to drive that, Manu. You've been driving all this while. So why don't you start with your have you heard and what you've come across? Or
Right.
do you
So,
want to
it's
tell
mine
us
is a
next
have you
week when you
seen
are
and
in a
have you
very
thought?
interesting place, Manu?
No, I will give you a little preview of
Okay.
that interesting place, because I've been thinking about the Olympics, but not from peak athletic performance point of view, because I'm a very vain person at the best of times. I've been looking at Olympic uniforms that different countries have been wearing. So there's been some criticism, I don't know, fairly or otherwise, of the Indian contingent's uniform, which seemed to be designed, not very well. I mean, most countries, I think, take this as an opportunity to make a cultural statement. Haiti's uniforms have been described as a tool of counter colonization. Of course, India, they just try to put the flag or the tricolor on it. But see, what I thought about, what should be the Indian uniform. Does India have a common clothing culture, which we don't, right? Of course. But I tried to look into this a little bit, and I discovered that the oldest sort of Indian clothing is what was prevalent during the Indus Valley civilization, which was just one long cloth. So it should have been draped for women like a dhoti, or women like a sari. So I was very happy to see the Indian women wearing the saris. But of course, there's been criticism for that. But this is the interesting thing, which I thought, me being me, I came back to politics, and I really thought through why during this entire budget session and in the last few months, Rahul Gandhi has been wearing a t-shirt, right? So if you remember, Rahul Gandhi pre 2021, 2022 was mostly in his white kurta pajamas, right? And but in the last 2 years, and people have sort of drawn the line at the Bharat Jodo Yatra, and I can understand that, when you're walking, I think he walked maybe 15 kilometers a day, or upwards of. And I could imagine him going with the white t-shirt and the sort of the khaki pants, or the chinos, or the cargo pants. But then now he's continued to wear those within the parliament, right? Um, I think it's an interesting statement. I'm not going to say yes or no for it, but I want to leave people to think about whether you know you think someone like Rahul Gandhi, now that being leader of opposition, should dress up a little bit more, go back to the kurta, or wear something a little bit more formal, or he's just wearing whatever he's comfortable with, right? And there is a element of sincerity to that, which we maybe lose in politics because it's all about aesthetics and optics these days. So I started from Olympics and ended up coming back to the budget session.
But there was clothes in between, so it was interesting. Richard, what about you? What have you had your eye on?
I'm going to go to this idea of universal basic income is sort of perpetrated as this solution to AI taking over everyone's jobs. The idea is that you provide a fixed monthly income to people. So there was this big study done recently over 3 years where about 1,000 low income individuals in the US, so people earning less than $30,000. I think the per capita income in the US is about $50,000. So they all received $1,000 a month unconditionally, and then about 2,000 participants received $50 per month. And they tried to do a control group study where they figured out whether that improves people's lives in any way. And they found that um, the amount of people working continued to be the same. So, give or take, only 2% decrease in labor participation in terms of people working. But there were some improvements in your health if you continued working. So if you didn't continue working because you got the $1,000 a month or for whatever reason, then your health did not improve. But if you continued working, then your health care, the number of health cases reduced dramatically, and people felt financially more secure. But at the same time, it's more people did not start, say, businesses, or people didn't invest in their education outcomes or their like any capital development per se, like for personal skills and so on. So it was interesting to see a really elaborate study done to figure out whether just giving people money makes a difference. And the net piece, the only marginal improvement seen was in healthcare if you continue to work, and no other real improvement per se. So that was surprising. I expected like people to work less or to do more entrepreneurial gigs or find more fulfilling jobs, but it didn't change many things. As in, like human beings, desire is of utmost importance, jealousy, all of those things play, right? So just giving people money is not enough. Like which has been the theory for a long time. So I thought that was a really interesting study from the US.
Super. I can go at the end, and I have one small comment and one longer comment. The first one is that I'm personally really enjoying watching the budget interactions. I think, nothing is more powerful than an energized opposition. And there have been some really, really sharp debates. And it's really nice to see that, because that is the space for debate, that is where you bring the really meaty bits and take them apart. And it's fantastic to see so many younger politicians stand up and speak quite passionately. So I've really enjoyed that. And the other one, which is probably not the best note to end on, but as many of you may have read in the news about the incident in a coaching center in Delhi where some young students were drowned. They drowned to death because the basement got flooded. And I can't stop thinking about it. I remember reading a memoir by Ishar Judge Aluwalia, who was a renowned economist. She used to head CPR, and she passed away a few years back. And she talked about her own journey. And she wrote this line about how in countries like India, education has always been a really powerful tool for people to achieve, social and economic mobilization. It really can be that sort of powerful force where if you get a good education and you get those opportunities, you can go on to do much better perhaps than previous generations, at least economically speaking. And that's honestly, that's all it is. I mean, these kids are often not from Delhi or Bombay. They come and live there in pretty cramped living quarters, in these very sort of budget hostels. They attend their classes. The whole aim is to be able to take that civil services exam. I mean, at what cost, And I just saw, I think it's really raining over these last few days in cities like Delhi. And I saw someone tweet saying, "It's raining. Take care, everyone. We're on our own." I don't think that any citizenry should be left feeling that way. That they should feel so vulnerable that if there's a basement flooded, there are no repercussions, there are no safety mechanisms, help will come to you hours later. I just felt really quite sad reading that, and it's sort of just been lingering in my head ever since I heard about it.
Today is income tax day, and I think one of the things, yeah, like I think we don't have a problem paying taxes. It's what we get in return, and that's
Yeah.
the saddest part, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us on this episode. We're grateful that you listened to us and make it this far. You can reach out to us with any feedback, India Dialogue Podcast at gmail.com. We're also on X, TID_podcast, the India Dialogue _podcast, on YouTube at India Dialogue Podcast. Manu is at Manuraj1983, Mitali at Mitali Live, Ruchir at Ruchir_P, all on X. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining. Bye.